Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera. Saya Kesatuan Johari dan ini agenda AWANI. Malam ini kita berbicara mengenai hubungan dua hala ASEAN dan Kesatuan Eropah. Saya amat bertuah bersama dengan kita pada malam ini ialah Luc van der Boon, iaitu Ketua dan Duta dan Ketua Delegasi Kesatuan Eropah EU ke Malaysia. Welcome to the studio, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Carol. And pleasure being here.
All right, first and foremost, we'll talk about, before we jump into the ASEAN and EU relationship, let us discuss about Malaysia and EU relationship currently. The FTA, Malaysia-EU FTA is supposed to be realized maybe in 2013, 2012, but until now, it's still pending. Is there any new stories from the aspect of Malaysia-EU FTA?
Well, first of all, we have a very good relationship, not only in trade and investment between the EU and Malaysia. Overall, we have a very good and booming relationship. We were given the mandate by Malaysia by Prime Minister Najib and the EU by President Barroso of the European Commission in 2010 to start negotiations simultaneously on an FTA and a PCA, a Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. And the mandate that we received from our two political leaders was to conclude these negotiations in 2 years. Now, we kind of all knew that that was maybe a little bit ambitious and optimistic because specifically FTA negotiations are very complex and very difficult. We started with a lot of enthusiasm. We still have a lot of enthusiasm. These negotiations in October 2010, and we made a lot of progress until we hit some red lines in 2012. We had the last full round in May 2012, and then the Malaysian side said that they would need new political mandates to tackle some of the issues that got us stuck at the time.
What was the issue?
There were automotive industries, government procurement, or environment-related issues. Nothing that we would not be able to overcome, but for which Malaysia at the time said they needed new political guidelines, new political mandates. So they would receive them after the elections. We all know that the elections then finally only took place in May the year afterwards, at a time when Malaysia got very much involved in the TPP. Again, very, very complex negotiations, which made it difficult to conduct these negotiations on two fronts, one with the EU, one with the TPP. And at the time, apparently, from Malaysian side, the TPP got a little bit more preference. Maybe they were put under more pressure to make advances, to make progress in those areas. And it was only at the end of last year that Malaysia indicated to us that they would be ready to start looking into our FTA again. We had a very good visit on the 26th of April by our new Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, who attended the ASEAN Economic Ministers EU Trade Commissioner consultations here in Kuala Lumpur. She had a short meeting with MITI Minister Mustafa that was then followed up on the 11th of May in Brussels by a full-fledged bilateral between Minister Mustafa and Cecilia Malmström. And during that bilateral, it was decided, first of all, it was noted that both sides are still very much interested in continuing these FTAs, this bilateral FTA, and bring it back on the tracks, basically. That they both would give their officials instructions to set up technical working groups to look at issues that were difficult at the time and see how we could get out of them, so to put all of this back on track, and that they would talk again about how to bring this forward, the two of them, the two leaders, at the ministerial, I think in Nairobi in December. I think it's Nairobi, WTO ministerial, where both of them will attend. So that is where we are now. So we are doing efforts from both sides to bring these talks back on track.
This is a bilateral FTA, not a multilateral FTA EU-ASEAN.
No, this is the bilateral EU-Malaysia.
Why is that?
well, we had one. The EU, we are multilateralists. We very highly value the central role played by the United Nations, and that means, for what concerns trade, by the WTO. So for many, many years, we did not really want to contribute to what Pascal Lamy, one of our trade commissioners in the 2000-2005 period, who afterwards became Director General of the WTO, he said, I do not want to contribute to this spaghetti bowl of bilateral FTAs. We are multilateralists. We want to do things in the context of the WTO, or maybe, but we want to go lower than that level, region to region. So that was about the time that we started negotiating and looking into the possibility of concluding a region-to-region FTA, ASEAN EU, which then proved for a number of reasons impossible. And in 2009, these discussions were stopped at the time, and we started looking into bilateral FTAs as well. But we have always said the bilateral FTAs that we conclude with member states of ASEAN are building blocks, stepping stones to the ultimate big prize, which would be an EU-ASEAN region-to-region FTA. So for the time being, we did conclude one with Singapore, and we're negotiating with Vietnam, with which there is, I understand from my colleagues, a lot of progress. And then we had talks going on with Malaysia and with Thailand.
All right, we have to take our first short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about economic relationship and people-to-people relationship, Malaysia and the EU. We'll be right back right after this. Excellent. Semula lagi dalam agenda AWANI, masih lagi dengan Tuan Yang Terutama Liu van der Born, iaitu Duta dan juga Ketua Delegasi Kesatuan Eropah EU ke Malaysia. And now on the third part, we will talk about the Malaysia-EU relationship, people-to-people relationship and business-to-business relationship. Now, business or B2B first. Green economics is one of the big industry, or the big field opportunity in Europe, and what is the potential in Malaysia?
I think the potential is very big. I think a lot of attention is being paid by the Malaysian authorities to greening the economy. I was very much impressed when I arrived here nearly 3 years ago, around the time when I attended in this country the first IGEM, and I saw the abundance of journalists and media representatives at the various press conferences that were organized by the government in the context of IGEM in the KLCC, which is a good indication of you have your finger on the pulse. Basically, you see the interest that lives in Malaysia in that respect. And for us, Malaysia is a very interesting partner because we have always been at the forefront in the EU in the fight against climate change. We had our first climate change plans, programs already in the mid-70s. In the build-up to COP21 in Paris in December, we do not let a stone, a rock unturned to make this a success. And so we're also looking very much forward to what we can do together with Malaysia. That is also one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about that later, but it obviously reflects on Malaysia. We have taken the initiative to set up a policy dialogue with ASEAN on environment and sustainable development. So we have, for a number of years now in IGEM, had the great honor and pleasure to have the biggest pavilion. A lot of European companies from various member states come here to advertise their services and products and to try to establish business relationships. We also have from our level, from the EU, a couple of programs that we initiated to promote cooperation between SMEs, not only in the green economy area, but definitely that's a substantial and integral part of it. One of them is the business avenues, which a number of ASEAN countries participate, and the other one is the Sub-SEAM project, which is run and managed by the European Union Malaysian Chamber of Commerce and Industry here, and which has basically as sole purpose increase business-to-business relationships and make it easier for counterparts from Europe and Malaysia to find each other and to start or expand on existing relations.
I wanted to ask about SME, since you mentioned it first. The challenge of the young, new emergent businessmen, the new SMEs, the new entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs are, number one is market access, and number two, access to funding. So, do you think it would be a great opportunity for Malaysian or ASEAN SMEs to work together with together with their counterparts in Europe?
Yeah, well, this is what these two programs are all about. You know, create platforms that provide information about possibilities to work together for European SMEs in Malaysia or in other member states of ASEAN, and vice versa. So we have developed at the EU level a whole set of IT platforms which make it very easy to obtain very accurate, very up-to-date and detailed information about all the administrative procedures that need to be followed to start up a company or a joint venture in any of the member states of the EU that belong to the single market. So this is all very exciting stuff, and these are platforms that are actually used. You know, we have indications that we don't do this just to have them created and sit there, but they're actually very practically used.
And now let's talk about people-to-people relationship. You know, there's a lot of airlines flying Malaysians to Europe and vice versa. The internet, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. So basically, on the surface, I can say a relationship between people to people is very good. In fact, we have Malaysian students studying in France and many parts of Europe. Even in my days at the university, I studied Italian language. So moving forward, see, so moving forward, how do you see the relationship between Malaysians and European?
Expanding. Again, I'm a born optimist, but when I just look at the facts, at the figures of the last years, you see that there's an increase of the mobility between our people in Europe and Malaysia and in ASEAN as a whole. We know that air traffic between and to and in the Asia-Pacific region is going to be percentage-wise in the coming 5-10 years phenomenal. We want to be part of that. We also know that air traffic specifically between the EU and Malaysia and ASEAN as a whole is continuously increasing. That is one of the reasons why we also have indicated in the context of our revamped strategy with ASEAN that we would be very willing to start looking into negotiating a civil aviation agreement. We have continuously expanded our people-to-people links in the education sector. There are a whole number of Erasmus Mundus fellowships that are available to students and scientists and researchers in ASEAN. We have, I think, on an annual basis, about 4,000 ASEAN students that go study in Europe on scholarships provided by the EU or by any of the 28 member states. And these are figures that are growing. So that's all very good news. We also have something we used to call the framework programs for research and technological development. The last one stopped in 2014 and is now replaced by something we call Horizon 2020, which is all about science and technology, mostly internally in the EU, but with a large dimension dealing with international cooperation. And we see, and specifically me as ambassador here to Malaysia, with a lot of satisfaction that the participation of Malaysian research institutes is constantly increasing. So there are very good, well-cemented links between our two peoples. And one of my tasks is to promote Europe here, and I know that my my counterparts in the member states in the EU are doing the same thing, and I think so far, without wanting to sound too pretentious, with success, because it seems to work.
Let me ask one more business questions to you. Is there any particular project that you're eyeing in Malaysia? Locomotive project or transport?
Well, this is up to the businesses, and I'm here to basically represent the 28 member states. So it's difficult for me to single out, excuse me, individual sectors or individual companies, because that is a very slippery slope that I would dare myself on. I'm here to represent everything, but there are a lot of exciting projects in the energy sector, in the transportation sector that are ongoing or in the planning in Malaysia. And I'm sure that a lot of our companies are looking at the developments in those areas with great interest.
All right, we have to take another short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about EU ASEAN. Let's take a break. See you later. Ketemu lagi dalam agenda AWANI, masih bersama dengan tuan yang terutama, Liu Commander Von, iaitu ketua dan juga duta dan juga ketua delegasi Kesatuan Eropah ke Malaysia. And on the 22nd of June 2015, you have released a council conclusion of EU ASEAN relations. And can you elaborate more about this?
Yep. Very exciting developments. We are, the EU, one of the oldest dialogue partners of ASEAN. We had our first ministerial EU-ASEAN in the early 70s. So since then, we have continuously worked on expanding the relationship. And one of the things that makes our relationship very special is that ASEAN has a lot of dialogue partners, rightfully so, because it's an unbelievably exciting project. But of all these dialogue partners, we're the only one that, just like ASEAN, is a regional project.
Correct.
So we always say we share the same DNA. We should look at each other. We should trying to learn from each other's mistakes and accomplishments. And we are constantly expanding on the good relationship that we already have. And that is why, after a whole number of increases in exchanges at the highest level, lots of ministerial visits to this region from Europe and vice versa, us upgrading our relationship also at the political level in line with the Brunei Plan of Action, which is basically the guideline for ASEAN's cooperation. We have decided in the beginning of this year, our High Representative, Federica Mogherini, took the initiative to develop a strategic thinking about how we could upgrade this relationship to a higher level. The result of that was that on the 18th of May, the European Commission, together with the European External Action Services, presented a joint communication called EU-ASEAN, a partnership with a strategic purpose. The idea was to kind of highlight everything that we have accomplished so far and build upon that by a number of very practical ideas to expand on this relationship and to look into, provide food for thought to see if we could eventually upgrade this to a fully fledged strategic partnership. So the communication was presented the 18th of May. The 22nd of June, the European Council fully endorsed this and supported the initiatives. And since then, we are promoting this idea, and we have been working on rendering a number of these proposals contained in the communication practically feasible. One of the probably the most visible, we've talked about this before, more at the bilateral level, is trade. The EU is the single largest investor provider of foreign direct investment in ASEAN. We have a total stock of 157 billion euro investment in ASEAN, which basically accounts for close to a quarter of all the FDI that goes into ASEAN. We have more than 10,000 companies working in ASEAN, and we are ASEAN's second largest trading partner in 2013 with a total bilateral trade in services and goods figure of 236 billion euro, which all is fantastic and wonderful, and it apparently shows that our businesses are thriving and that the trade relations and investment relationship is continuously expanding. But another exciting thing that happened, that was announced by Cecilia Malmström, our trade commissioner, in April when she was here for the AEM meeting, was that she wanted to relaunch the idea to rekindle our EU-ASEAN FTA talks, which, as I said, started in 2007, had to be stopped in 2009 for political reasons, Myanmar at the time, but also because there was at the time a huge discrepancy between, in between ASEAN member states, and it's very difficult to then speak with one voice and conclude an FTA that would cover everybody's needs and interests. Those two problems have been dealt with now, and the time is ripe, as Commissioner Malmström put it, to engage in a stock taking to see, first of all, in how far the ASEAN economic community is going to be advanced, because it would obviously make a lot of sense to have an ASEAN economic community, which is kind of like a single market, cooperate, have an FTA with another single market, that we would look in this stock-taking effort at the benefits brought by the bilateral FTAs, like Singapore, where we are with the negotiations with Malaysia, with Vietnam, with Thailand, and that we then study very intensively what the added value would be of a region-to-region FTA. So the idea was that our senior officials would report back to the ministers by the end of the year, and that we would take it from there.
We have about 1 minute, but this is going to be a complex question. The challenge to achieve a fully fledged relationship partnership of EU-ASEAN, what would be the challenge?
I think the only challenge that needs to be overcome is political willingness from both sides to really want to do it. I mean, we have everything in place. We are a perfect partners in trade, in investment. We have seen a dramatic upgrade in our cooperation on non-traditional security issues, cybersecurity, maritime security cooperation, preventive diplomacy. There's so many issues that we are now fully engaged in. We would really like to become a member of the EAS, the East Asia Summit, because we are already an extremely active promoter of security issues at the regional level in the context of ARF, and that is also why I'm very happy to announce that our High Representative Federica Mogherini will be in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur,
when?
The 5th and the 6th of August, to participate in the ASEAN-EU Post-Ministerial Conference and in the ARF, the ASEAN Regional Forum Ministerial.
All right, we'll wait for the update. Must be very, very interesting for the relationship between Malaysia, EU, as well as Malaysia, ASEAN. And that's about it for tonight. Demikian saja agenda AWANI pada malam ini, bersama dengan Tuan Yang Terutama Luke Van der Bon, iaitu Duta dan Ketua Delegasi Kesatuan Eropah EU ke Malaysia. Kita bincang mengenai hubungan dua hal antara Malaysia dan EU, juga ASEAN dan juga EU. Sebarang cadangan hantarkan ke platform sosial media kami. Saya Syafzan Johari. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.